Beryl Marguerite Atherton was born in 1907 in Woodstock, Connecticut. Around the age of 46, she lived in Marblehead, Massachusetts, where she taught 5th grade at Glover School. She lived alone in a small house on Sewell Street and was described as a quiet and kind individual who was well liked by her students and colleagues. That is, until her untimely death in the fall of 1950. 2 days after Thanksgiving, on Saturday, November 25, 1950, Beryl was at home with her white Spitz dog, Esky, calling around to different colleagues, trying to make dinner plans. However, a severe nor'easter was battering the Massachusetts coast, which locals dubbed the Little Hurricane, and most people didn't want to get out. So late in the afternoon, she decided to drive the 4 miles to nearby Salem to retrieve her fur coat from the cleaners, and she was seen wearing it later that day. She then went to her safe deposit box at Naumkeag Trust, and then on to the grocery store where she bought chicken, pork, and a Boston Herald Traveler. She then drove home and was spotted around 6 p.m. by her paperboy, who saw her putting something in the trash can outside her house. At that point, the storm's winds had reached 60 to 70 miles per hour, and heavy rain was falling on the city. Back inside, she removed her dress, draped it over the banister, and went to the kitchen wearing her pink sweater, white slip, and brown shoes. She then began cutting up some of the meat she bought to feed Esky. At that point, it's believed an unknown individual broke through a side door on her porch, as the door latch was later found on the kitchen floor, and began attacking her. The attacker kicked Esky out of the kitchen and then sadly strangled Beryl to death. They then took a small knife and slashed her throat in a crisscross pattern. After she was dead, the killer took a bone-handled bread knife from a drawer in the kitchen, broke the blade into 5 pieces, and scattered it around her body. The handle was then returned to the drawer. It's believed the killer did this to throw off investigators, and it worked because for years it was thought to be the murder weapon, until forensic testing proved otherwise. As for the actual murder weapon, well, there's a lot of confusion surrounding that. A lot of articles and reporting suggest that 2 knives were found at the scene, the first one being the broken bone-handled bread knife. The second knife, which was also allegedly found in the same drawer, was thought to also have been used in the attack, but eventually both knives were ruled out because they were deemed too dull to create the wounds found on her throat. If that's the case, then the killer most likely brought the murder weapon with them. That makes sense because if you're going through all the trouble to clean up a crime scene, which the killer later did, you're probably not going to leave behind the biggest clue of them all, the murder weapon. After Beryl was dead, the killer went upstairs, possibly to look for something of value. It's worth noting that Esky was later found alive, hiding in the upstairs closet. I haven't seen this mentioned before, but could the killer have gone into her bedroom looking for the dog? Investigators know for sure the killer was in there because blood was found on a pillowcase on Beryl's bed. After that, it's theorized that the killer left and returned with help to clean up all the blood in the kitchen. This is most likely the reason investigators never found any fingerprints or shoe prints. 2 days after the murder, on Monday morning, November 27, 1950, at around 8 a.m., the neighborhood milkman, Kenneth Phillips, came by Beryl's house to make his routine delivery of her regular quart of milk. However, he found her house strangely quiet, with no sign of Esky or Beryl. He opened the back door to place the milk in the refrigerator, and that's when he saw Beryl's body. In a panic, he ran across the street to the Chapman's home and had them call the police. Around the time of her death, she'd gone on a few dates with a local man who immediately became a suspect, but with no physical evidence to tie him to the crime, he was never charged, and neither was anyone else. Unfortunately, in 1950, evidence collection wasn't as meticulous as it is now, and with the reported stormy weather at the time of the murder, it's likely that a lot of the evidence, if there was any, was missed. In recent years, 2 local authors, Harry Christensen and Rich Santalsanio, published a book called Murder in Marblehead, Who Killed Beryl Atherton, which re-examines the case and lays out theories about who may have killed her. Their theory includes 3 possible suspects, but their names have never been released. It's now been over 75 years since Beryl Atherton was brutally murdered, and as of December 2025, this case remains unsolved. Breanne Alece Pennington, who went by the nickname Breezy, was born in Tacoma, Washington on October 27, 1992. She grew up in Riverside, California, where she was raised by her aunt and uncle, Jim and Brenda Hull, who eventually adopted Breanne and her brother. After graduating from Riverside High School, Breanne attended Riverside Community College. Growing up, Breanne loved horses and became an accomplished rider. Later, as an adult, she raised exotic chickens. She was also active in her local congregation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Gardner, Massachusetts. By the age of 30, Breanne and her husband Aaron and their 4 children lived in Gardner. Unfortunately, while Breanne was always a supportive wife and a dedicated mother, Aaron was allegedly the complete opposite. He'd struggled with a mental health disorder for several years, which some said he was allegedly faking just to get out of the military. He also constantly threatened to take his own life, and then would refuse to seek help. When Breanne actually got him to see a therapist, he never took it seriously and never followed through on their recommendations. Regardless, Breanne continued trying to make sure he had proper medication and ensure that he actually attended his appointments. She even had to go with him and speak for him during the sessions. At some point, Breanne had had enough and began making plans to move with the children to Texas to get away from Aaron. So he once again threatened to take his own life. Then on Sunday, October 22nd, 2023, everything took a turn for the worse. That morning, at around 9 o'clock, the couple's 4 children, who'd been getting ready to go to church, showed up at a neighbor's house, saying they couldn't find their father, and their mother was in the bedroom crying, and they couldn't get to her. That's when the neighbor called 911 and notified members of Breanne's church. When her bedroom was checked, they found it blocked by a dresser and had to force it open. While official reports say that officers were the one who entered Breanne's bedroom, her aunt said it was actually members of the Latter-day Saints church who forced their way into the bedroom, essentially pushing the dresser out of the way. Regardless, once inside, Breanne was found shot to death in her bed. As for Aaron, he was missing along with his vehicle. Using video surveillance, they determined that Aaron left the house shortly before 9 a.m., not long after the murder. Since he blocked the bedroom door, he had to escape out the second-story bedroom window. They also learned by using spent shell casings from the scene that the murder weapon was a Walther pistol given to Breanne by her grandfather. However, that weapon was nowhere to be found and has never been recovered. Breanne's aunt told police that Aaron had spent the previous day frantically searching the house for something. It's now believed he was looking for Breanne's gun, which was ultimately used to murder her. Also, the day before the murder, Aaron returned from visiting his parents in California, where he borrowed an undisclosed sum of cash from his father and told a friend on his way home from the airport that he was 10 steps ahead of everyone. The morning after the murder, at around 5 a.m., a hunter found his BMW abandoned about 1,500 yards into the woods at a Boy Scouts campground called Camp Collier, which was located about 3 miles from the Pennington home. However, once again, there was no sign of Aaron. Investigators then obtained a search warrant for his cell phone records and obtained a disturbing note typed the night before. "Don't say anything. Be quiet. If she wakes up, just say you're getting a nasal spray. Get on the side of the bed, very close proximity to the head. Put a hole in her head." Law enforcement spent several days searching a large area of woods around Camp Collier in Gardner and nearby Ashburnham. The search included multiple police agencies, canine and aviation units, but unfortunately, Aaron was never found. Before the murder, he'd talked about living off the grid, leading many to think he might be doing just that if he's still alive. It's been theorized online that he may be receiving help, but this hasn't been confirmed. The couple's 4 children have been in the care of relatives since the incident. Aaron was 33 at the time and is now in his mid-30s, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, with blue eyes and natural blonde hair. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of Aaron Pennington, please call the Massachusetts State Police at 508-832-9124. Breanne was murdered on October 22, 2023, and as of December 2025, her killer has never been brought to justice. Henry Bedard Jr. was born in Salem, Massachusetts on June 25, 1959. At the age of 15, Henry lived in Swampscott, Massachusetts, and was a sophomore at Swampscott High School. Despite standing only 5'4" and weighing 135 pounds, he'd earned a spot on the junior varsity football team. Friends and family described him as a happy, good-humored individual. Outside of school, he was a familiar face at his father's service station on High Street in Danvers, Massachusetts, where he worked pumping gas. He also worked as a caddy at a golf course and had saved $900, which he planned to use to buy his first car. On the morning of December 16, 1974, Henry left home and walked his younger brother to the junior high. He then walked another 2 miles to Swampscott High School and attended all his classes that day. When school let out early that day at 2:15 p.m., he took a bus to Vennons Square, which was unusual as he typically walked home with his friends. Once there, he dropped off a roll of 8mm film at CVS and bought some perfume for his sister for Christmas. After leaving the store around 3 p.m., he crossed into the Department of Public Works lot, wished the workers a Merry Christmas, and showed them the CVS bag saying he was going home to wrap presents. He then headed toward the back of the lot, where the woods began. When he wasn't home by 5:30, his family began to worry. By 7 p.m., his father, Henry Sr., picked up Henry's friend, Paul Sucaro, and drove around in the heavy rain, searching and calling for Henry in parks, woods, and back paths. They assumed he'd fallen and was likely injured, but what actually happened was way worse. By the next day, Swampscott police had arranged for a helicopter to assist in the search of the town. During school that day, a 10-year-old boy by the name of Cliff Goodman learned from a friend of his about an empty wallet and a perfume bottle strangely sitting on a ledge near the Swampscott Public Works yard. After school, Cliff and his friend walked a trail behind the houses on Norfolk Avenue or off Suffolk Avenue, behind the Department of Public Works building, and arrived at the location at around 2:30 p.m. Once there, they began scanning the leaves for the perfume and wallet. That's when they got the shock of a lifetime. Covered in leaves and blood was the body of Henry, dead from a blow to the head. This location was known locally as Swampscott View, and it overlooks the Public Works Yard and Paradise Road. It was known as a teen hangout and definitely not a path Henry would typically take. His autopsy showed that he'd been struck at least 5 times with a blunt object, and a baseball bat that was found nearby was determined to be the murder weapon. It was specifically a Louisville Slugger Hank Aaron model with unusual carvings on the knob. The homemade carvings were a series of lines, possibly the Roman numeral 6 or the letter K. Even after contacting many Little League officials, the police could not find out who owned the bat. Forensic tests confirmed the bat was stained with human blood. However, at the time, DNA testing was not available, so state police were unable to determine the blood type or identify the donor. The bat was later sent to the FBI for further analysis. Like the state police, the FBI was unable to determine either the blood type or the identity from the blood on the bat. Police were able to lift 2 partial fingerprints, but because Henry was never fingerprinted during the autopsy, they can't say for sure whether those prints belonged to him or to his killer. Sadly, after his death, his parents divorced and moved away. Over the years, Henry's clothing and the bat have been sent out multiple times for updated forensic and DNA testing, but no leads were ever found. However, now in 2025, investigators have exhumed Henry's body, hoping that he fought back and possibly had some of the killer's DNA under his fingernails. If you have any information about the murder of Henry Bedard, please call the Unresolved Case Unit tip line at 1-855-MA-SOLVE or 1-855-627-6583. Henry was found murdered on December 17, 1974, and as of December 2025, this case remains unsolved. Sabrina Lee Hatheway was born on August 17, 1991. Unfortunately, her father died in a fire at the age of 21, and her mother was involved with drugs, prostitution, and associated with many criminals. Because of this, Sabrina and her 3 sisters were taken by state child welfare authorities. While Sabrina was sent to live with relatives, her 3 sisters were placed into the adoption system. Unfortunately, by the age of 7, Sabrina was being sexually abused by a convicted sex offender, and by the time she was 15, she was pregnant, and the father was a fellow classmate of hers. She would give birth to a second child by the age of 19, and both children were left to be raised by family members. Just like her mother, Sabrina went from one abusive relationship to another, and by the age of 23, she was living in Worcester, Massachusetts, and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was also receiving disability benefits for an unknown reason. Then, in December of 2014, she would strangely go missing. In the early morning hours of December 20th, Sabrina left her aunt's home, saying she was going for a ride with a friend and would be right back. Sadly, she never returned and was never heard from again. Turns out the friend she was referring to was none other than her ex-boyfriend, Kevin Crozier, but they didn't know it at the time. After leaving the house, her phone was turned off and has never been recovered by authorities. She and Crozier had been in a very volatile relationship and had broken up a week before her disappearance. She then moved out of the house they'd been living in together, which was actually owned by Crozier's grandmother. Regardless, they continued hanging out. When Crozier was questioned about the night Sabrina disappeared, he said that after picking her up, they went to a party at a friend's home, where they both drank before being driven home by a friend. He said that after arriving home, they went to bed, and when he woke up a few hours later, she was gone. Less than 2 weeks after Sabrina vanished, on New Year's Day, 2015, authorities were called to Crozier's home in response to a fire. An investigation determined that the fire was the result of arson, and the likely suspect was Crozier himself. They then learned that Crozier had offered $1,000 to 2 men, Scott Phelan and Lionel Bermudez, in exchange for their help in burning down the house. The men reportedly claimed that Crozier's reasoning was to collect insurance money, but it was later discovered that the home wasn't even insured. The men said that on the day of the fire, the 3 of them got high on cocaine, filled a can with gasoline, and then drove to Crozier's home. Once there, they poured the gasoline throughout the home, and when they finally ignited it, an explosion blasted Bermudez out of the house and caught his pants on fire. When Crozier was questioned, he told police that he spent New Year's Eve at a friend's apartment. However, those friends told police that Crozier had left early on January 1st and didn't return until several hours later. At that point, Crozier was arrested and charged with arson. It's now believed he set it on fire to allegedly destroy evidence related to Sabrina's disappearance. 2 weeks after the fire, police searched the house and seized drain traps, sink traps, pieces of a stained mattress, and paperwork bearing Sabrina's name. However, no evidence of remains or a homicide was found, but the burn pattern did show that the accelerant was poured around the bed in the master bedroom. In April 2017, Sabrina's mother, Brenda Hathaway, was shocked to learn that Crozier's house was set to be torn down because she felt there was most likely evidence that would lead to her daughter. Brenda had worked hard to get sober, but the disappearance of her daughter sadly led her right back to drinking and doing drugs. Then, on April 30th, the same month she learned about the home's destruction, she died from a combination of heroin and a violent altercation with her boyfriend. On May 25th, 2018, Crozier was finally convicted of the arson charge and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Since the case took so long to prosecute, he had already served 3 years of the sentence and was paroled in April 2020. This was not Crozier's first run-in with the law. In 2006, when he was only 19 years old, he was convicted of robbing and beating up 2 elderly men and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in a state prison. The first elderly man he attacked, he only came away with $25. However, the second man was thankfully able to ward him off using his cane. In 2012, he was back in court on charges of intimidating a witness, along with assault and battery. The woman from that case, Crozier's former girlfriend, took out a restraining order against him, alleging that he'd threatened to beat her up and take their young daughter while throwing a lit cigarette at her and punching holes in her wall. In the restraining order request, she wrote, and I quote, "He had a violent past, and I'm afraid for my safety." As of today, little information has been released about the investigation and search for Sabrina. Most people who might know what happened that night are either missing, incarcerated, or dead. A year after Crozier's release for the arson, in April 2021, he and another individual were shot on John Street in Worcester by a 25-year-old local man named Troy Marvin. Crozier was taken to the hospital, but no further updates on his condition were provided. If you have any information regarding the disappearance and presumed murder of Sabrina Hatheway, please call the Worcester Police at 508-799-8600. Sabrina stood 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed about 110 pounds. She went missing on December 21st, 2014, and as of December 2025, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Simone Stephanie Ridinger was born on January 5, 1960. After the death of her father, when she was still quite young, her mother, Jane, decided to start over and moved them to New York. That's where they met their neighbor, John Ridinger, who was also widowed and had a daughter named Betsy. Eventually, Jane and John married, and John adopted Simone, giving her his last name. After some time, the new blended family moved to Sherburne, Massachusetts. Simone was described as a very creative individual who enjoyed playing different instruments and singing. Unfortunately, school was difficult for her, leading some to believe she was being a rebellious teenager. Eventually, she dropped out and made plans to get her GED instead. By the time she left home at the age of 17, in early 1977, Jane and John had divorced. She then moved into her own apartment on Linden Street in Framingham, Massachusetts. She continued her love for music and was known by many as an independent and free-spirited woman. Once on her own, she got a job waitressing at the Rainbow Restaurant in Natick, Massachusetts. After Simone's shift ended on Friday, September 2, 1977, which was the start of Labor Day weekend, she told fellow coworkers she planned to hitchhike to Cape Cod. It was normal at the time and something she did often. Her plan was to take a ferry from there to Martha's Vineyard, where she would meet her mother at a cottage on Chappaquiddick Island. But sadly, she never arrived. Due to recent highly publicized hitchhiker murders in the early to mid-70s, the public began to change their mind on the safety of hitchhiking, and that included Simone's coworkers and sister Betsy, who were very worried about her that weekend. Most of her previous rides were just short trips home from work, but the trip to Cape Cod was much farther away. Betsy even offered to drive her to the bus stop, but she declined, insisting that hitchhiking to Cape Cod was the best option. After clocking out around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, she changed into blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and white high-top sneakers. As soon as she left the restaurant, she began looking for a ride, and then disappeared without a trace. Nobody even saw what vehicle she got into. At first, Simone's family was not too worried when she didn't show up at Martha's Vineyard. They figured she was either delayed, met up with friends in Hyannis Port, or changed her plans. However, when they returned home 9 days later and realized Simone wasn't there, panic set in. Her family began reaching out to everyone who knew Simone, hoping for answers. But sadly, nobody had seen her. That's when her mother, Jane, went to the police and reported her missing. At first, the police thought she was just a runaway and didn't take the case seriously, believing she would come back on her own, but she never did. They questioned a few people, starting with her coworkers at the restaurant, but no leads developed. Then, on September 17th, they visited the Billerica House of Correction to speak with Simone's boyfriend. He told them that she had stopped writing to him. She was also supposed to visit him in jail on the 17th, but never showed up. That was unusual for Simone, especially since she'd been given special permission to visit him that day. Unfortunately, a full investigation wasn't opened until October 4th, over a month after she disappeared. They sent out flyers to other departments, but no leads were generated. For many years, the last place anyone reported seeing Simone was the restaurant. But in 1986, a witness came forward and said he had actually given Simone a ride early in the morning on September 3rd, the day after she disappeared. The witness, an elderly man who has since passed away, said he'd been en route to Cape Cod to buy some clock parts when he was stopped for a violation at a rest area at the intersection of Route 128 and Route 109 in Westwood, Massachusetts. The state trooper who stopped him had Simone in the back seat of his car, and after learning that both the man and Simone were headed to Cape Cod, the officer asked if he would finish driving her, and he agreed. The witness said he dropped Simone off at the Hyannis Airport Rotary and watched as she walked toward a nearby restaurant. Investigators believe his story because he was able to describe her appearance, which wasn't released to the public until 2017. He was also able to correctly describe her clothes and the belongings she had with her that morning. He specifically mentioned her shoes and a gray duffel bag. In 2016, several of Simone's co-workers were interviewed by police for the first time, and one of them, who worked with her that Friday, said that after Simone changed out of her waitress uniform, she put it into a small gray, Army-style duffel bag. This woman stated that many of the waitresses brought a change of clothes because they all hated the uniform. To investigators, this all but confirmed the man's story. In 2025, retired State Police Detective Lieutenant Rick Nagel read a story about Simone's disappearance in The Globe and immediately thought of Eric H. Anderson Jr. Anderson is a convicted killer from southeastern Massachusetts with a history of violent assaults on women. The reason Rick was so familiar with Anderson is that he worked on the murder of Ruth Masters and later helped convict Anderson for it. Feeling confident about his epiphany, he brought the theory to the police in Sherborne, where Simone had gone missing. Due to Rick's background as a detective and the fact that he helped put Anderson behind bars, they took the lead seriously and began exploring it. With information provided by Rick, they learned that Anderson was most likely in the area at the time. He was released on parole in 1974 and then actively began targeting women in the Cape Cod area. 6 months before Simone's disappearance, on May 14, 1977, Anderson murdered Ruth Masters in the Miles Standish State Forest, about 30 minutes from where Simone was last seen. Then, in October of 1977, a month after Simone disappeared, he attacked a female hitchhiker near the Sagamore Bridge, bound her hands, and then threatened to kill her. Thankfully, she was able to escape. This location is only about 20 minutes from the airport rotary where Simone was last dropped off. Anderson was eventually indicted for Ruth's murder in 1998, and in 2003, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. He's also considered a suspect in the disappearance of Judith Blayler, who went missing 2 weeks after Simone. He died in prison in 2016 and was never charged in connection with any missing persons cases. Police have Simone's DNA on file and have compared it to unidentified Jane Doe cases over the years, but no matches have been found. If you have any information about the disappearance of Simone Ridinger, please call the FBI's VICAP line at 1-800-634-4097 or the Sherborne Police Department at 508-653-2424. Simone disappeared on September 2, 1977, and as of December 2025, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved.